Equals London woke under a grey, uncertain sky. The Sunday stillness was broken only by the hum of distant traffic and the tolling of church bells. Inside Broadcasting House, the corridors of the BBC were filled with hurried footsteps and the smell of hot valves warming up. Harold Pierce, a senior radio technician, checked the copper wires once more. Every connection mattered. The Prime Minister was due to speak within hours. Across the city, in a modest terrace near Islington, Margaret Holloway poured tea for her son Thomas, who watched her silently, knowing their world was on the edge of something vast and terrible. "Do you think he'll do it?" she asked softly. Thomas only nodded. Outside, the air felt charged, like the pause before a storm that would sweep across nations. The date, September 3rd, 1939. The hour of decision approached.
The BBC's central control room buzzed like a living organism. Harold's fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted the frequency dials. Engineers whispered codes. Runners darted between rooms carrying messages stamped urgent. In the studio beyond the thick soundproof glass, Neville Chamberlain sat composed yet grave, his papers neatly aligned. The Prime Minister's voice, thin, cautious, would soon carry to millions. Harold thought of his own family listening at home, of the quiet dread they must be feeling. The red light above the microphone flickered. "We're live in 5 minutes," someone said. A silence heavier than any noise fell upon the room. It was the sound of history gathering itself for a breath. Outside, the world held still, waiting for words that would ignite an era of fire.
Equals. The red light turned solid. Across Britain, wireless sets crackled to life. Harold felt the tremor through the floor as Chamberlain began to speak. His voice, usually reserved and parliamentary, now carried the trembling dignity of a man forced by fate. Each word reverberated through the metallic air, an announcement of war. Harold swallowed hard. Outside the window, the muted city seemed to bow under invisible weight. In Islington, Margaret gripped Thomas's hand, tears welling as static faded into silence. "So, it's begun," she whispered. He nodded, jaw tight. Neither spoke again for a long time. The broadcast ended, but the echo would not. In that pause after the transmission, it felt as if the century itself had split between peace and the coming storm. When the broadcast ended, silence swept through London like a fog. Church bells began to toll again, slow and heavy. In pubs, men pushed their pints aside, faces pale. Margaret stepped onto her stoop, hearing the distant echo of air raid sirens being tested. Children still played, unaware of what those sounds meant. She folded her arms and looked toward the clouds. In Broadcasting House, Harold removed his headset, the faint imprint of metal left on his temples. Around him, the room buzzed with restrained emotion. Some wiped tears, others simply stared at the floor. "It's official then," murmured a voice. Britain was at war. Yet in that moment, the city did not roar. It held its breath, suspended between memory and the unknown. By nightfall, posters appeared on walls. "Your country needs you." Recruitment offices opened early, and lines formed under dim street lamps. Thomas Holloway stood among them, his breath visible in the cool September air. Around him, young men joked nervously, pretending not to notice the fear in one another's eyes. Back at Broadcasting House, Harold packed his equipment, the static of earlier transmissions still buzzing in his ears. The ministry had already requested every technical expert available for military communication. The civilian world was transforming overnight. Thomas wrote a note before leaving home. "Don't worry, Mum, I'll be back soon." Margaret found it on the table hours later, her tears smudging the ink. The war had not yet reached their shores, but it had arrived in every home. Weeks passed. Thomas's letters arrived from a training camp in Sandhurst, pages filled with underlined optimism. Margaret read them over candlelight, her heart both proud and shattered. In Broadcasting House, Harold now trained new operators for field radio systems, his mind heavy with what those signals would one day carry. "We'll send voices through smoke," he joked lightly, though the humor fell flat. Each code transmitted now felt heavier than speech. Rumors spread of German advances in Poland, of resistance crushed under iron tread. The war still felt distant, but the tremor of its approach grew louder with every bulletin. The airwaves themselves had become both lifeline and omen, carrying tidings of loss across invisible skies.
By early 1940, London was transformed. Gas masks hung in doorways, blackout curtains drawn with ritual precision. Harold's office now doubled as a broadcast center for government updates. He listened nightly to Churchill's growl of determination, transmitted across the continent. Margaret listened too, her hands trembling as she tuned the dial. On one such night, Thomas wrote of heavy clouds gathering over Europe, of the steady march toward something grim. The radio crackled mid-sentence, an air raid drill sounding through the city, the first of many. Margaret whispered a prayer as the sirens wailed outside. Harold looked through the glass of his studio and realized sound had become Britain's heartbeat, steady, fearful, defiant.
It was March when Margaret received the telegram. The words were few but final. Her son's unit had been struck during a training accident in France. She stared at the typewritten lines until they blurred. Outside, planes droned over London, practice flights for the war that was still gathering force. Harold visited her weeks later, carrying a small portable radio. "He listened to every word from home," he said gently. They sat together in silence as the broadcast announced new movements in Europe. Neither the static nor the air raid wails could fill the hollowness between them. The war had begun officially last autumn. Now it had become heartbreak. Grief hummed through Britain's frequency like an endless, unwelcome refrain. Months later, Harold's voice, once hidden behind machines, became part of the broadcasts themselves. With many gone to fight, engineers were asked to narrate national updates. His delivery was steady, resolved. "This is London," he would begin, echoing through millions of homes. Margaret listened nightly, recognizing his timbre instantly. She found solace in that voice, firm, humane, refusing despair. The broadcasts linked every village, every lonely heart into one fragile thread of endurance. "We endure together," Harold said one evening, his message reaching all corners of a battered nation. And for the first time in months, Margaret smiled through tears. Though her son was gone, his country still stood, speaking in unbroken rhythm into the world's darkness. Years later, when the guns quieted and London began to rebuild, Harold returned to the same studio where it had all begun. Dust lay thick on the console. He ran a hand over the old microphone, remembering the trembling voice that had declared war that September morning. Outside, bells now rang in celebration, not for peace alone, but for endurance. Margaret, older and slower, walked through the same streets, hearing laughter instead of sirens. In a shop window, a radio played, one of Harold's latest broadcasts, marking the anniversary of that day. "We remember," he said, his voice carrying through the alleys of memory. The echo of Chamberlain's broadcast still lived, not as a call to war, but as a testament to a nation that refused silence.